Dragon Ball and its power scaling is often the big talk amongst the anime community, more specifically on how well the main character of Son Goku compares to the rest of fiction in regards to how far he gets into it. And just like how every MC has their own cult following that states they solo everyone, Goku is always brought up as the primary example. With today's video, going over the many arguments on whether or not some of Goku's own feats are demonstrations of infinite speed, inaccessible speed, or even immeasurable speed. Now, while my general thoughts on this are already public, I feel like some people are more a fan of well-constructed counter-arguments to these positions in a formal video, instead of an impromptu stream with off-the-dome arguments. I want to die.
I know Surfbone.
So, let's get into it. The first thing we need to establish is the common mistake that can be noticed whenever people come to certain conclusions in regards to certain feats a character performs. This being the disregarding of context and internal consistency. Context being, for simplicity's sake, the circumstances that form the setting for an event, statement, or idea, and in terms of which can be fully understood and assessed. So whenever we look at fictional fights, for example, we must first assess the plot and the events occurring within the story to truly establish the significance of certain statements made or the impressiveness of particular actions that characters and/or forces of nature perform. When we do this, we end up developing what is called an internal consistency, or how consistent a work is with itself. And the best way to establish a good internal consistency is by coming up with holistic interpretations that take into account everything that is presented to us from the story in order for the series to make the most sense. That's what we're trying to do whenever we power scale or delve into any type of narrative analysis. Make the most sense of a story with what is presented to us and provide an interpretation with the least amount of contradictions and more explanatory power. And the best way to come to which is the better interpretation is by contrasting and comparing the many different ways one can interpret a statement or certain feats, and determine what would make the most sense to be true when considering the entire story. In other words, we often have to discuss and debate about it in order to come to a consensus about what would be the most consistent. So, let's look at these arguments and talk about the many issues you then run into when trying to rep certain interpretations of feats. This is a common one that gets misunderstood by almost everyone, including Death Battle, in which the argument details that Goku and Beerus must scale to the speed of their clashes that echoed across the macrocosm during the Battle of Gods arc. Now, while most, even myself, would be quick to say that this is a clear example of the common mistake of claiming a byproduct of a character's attack must be equal to the user's combat speed. The counter that is often presented is that they often use ki to amplify their bodies to move faster and create stronger punches. Therefore, if Goku and Beerus are using ki whenever they're punching each other and they're affecting the entire macrocosm as a result, then they would be capable of traveling that same distance solely based off of the idea of ki amplification, which would result in both characters having demonstrated infinite speed. While I understand where the argument does take certain ideas into account to make the most sense of the initial claim, however, there's a lot of context that is being ignored in order to make this argument work. The first being that it was ki being dispersed across the macrocosm as they punched each other, when they were just simply powerful shockwaves that resulted from their punches, not ki. While most would be quick to point out that it must have been ki due to the fact that the shockwave ceased due to Goku learning proper ki control while in its God form, however, there's many issues with this claim as well. For starters, we got to properly define what ki is. Ki is the latent power that all beings have that exist within them. And just like Goku said in the Buu saga, and Toriyama reiterates this same sentiment, that the most important and the hardest part is the ability to control your own ki. It's with this concept of ki control existing within Dragon Ball that we're able to understand how characters could destroy the very planet they're standing on, but not do so whenever they fight, because they have a far better control over their ki output and the area of effect of said attacks, so they don't just randomly destroy everything around them whenever they fight. Which the Goku vs Beerus clashes is honestly one of the best modern examples of the importance of ki control, as Goku, who just got introduced to this new god power, where he almost couldn't control how fast he moved at the beginning of their fight, then had to finally learn how to control his power properly to where he cancels out Beerus' attacks. And it's due to Goku finally accomplishing this that there is no big endangerment of the universe being obliterated, as it was heavily emphasized previously. So while Ki is used to enhance their bodies so they can output greater force, the shockwaves themselves are not composed of Ki. Just like how a shockwave from an explosion isn't composed of the elements that come from an explosion. It's a result that comes from an explosion occurring. It's not a component of the explosion. And because we never see Goku travel alongside these same shockwaves, we cannot make the claim that Goku can travel just as fast as these shockwaves. Even if we state this is true, that Goku and Beerus have infinite speed as a result of this feat, this would end up being contradicted by the instances where Whis is shown and stated to be vastly above both Goku and Beerus. As we know, many times in this series we see Whis traveling across the universe at what is stated to be his top speeds, in which we are even given specified time frames and how long these trips are before they even occur, which if we were to state Goku and Beerus scale to these shockwaves created by their punches that travel across the macrocosm in a matter of seconds, then they would have to be faster than Whis in order for this to be the case, which just isn't true. This infamous scene is what initially started this gigantic wave of Immeasurable Speed Goku arguments, in which people assume that because Goku moved within Hit's time skip dimension, that it was a product of him having immeasurable speed. Some would even go so far as to cite the English dub's interpretation of how King Kai described the event to back this up. However, this translation is not only incredibly far off from what was said in the original Japanese dub, but people coming to this conclusion means they have a complete lack of understanding of how Hit's time skip actually works. So how does it work? Well, we get a much clearer answer during the Goku assassination arc, in which Vados explains that whenever Hit is using his quote-unquote time-related abilities, he's in actuality going into his own separate dimension and hopping back out again. We even see this in action when Hit brings in someone that he was going to assassinate into this dimension, where he elaborates that in comparison to the rest of the world, time doesn't move. So after he kills him, it would look like to his subordinates that he died within an instant, because they were not pulled into the same dimension as he was. So whenever Hit uses his time skip, it would literally look like he teleported, as when Goku and Gang were first reacting to his fight with Vegeta, it was not until the Galactic King was able to decipher that Hit was using this ability did Goku then understand what was even happening, even implying that if he were to fight in Vegeta's place, he would have gotten beaten down just as badly. So Hit isn't actually literally stopping time and moving like he's Dio from JoJo's, he's literally going into his own dimension and traveling to another position in space within his dimension and coming back out. Hence why when Goku figured that he would only be in said dimension for X amount of time, he would then just have to predict where Hit would try to attack him in said specified amount of time, in which he states it was fairly easy because Hit is very predictable. It's even specified when Hit was fighting Dispo that Dispo is that much faster than Hit, he was able to speed blitz Hit as he was able to enter his dimension, which Dispo states he's able to tell Hit was about to do this due to him vibrating his body at a different frequency. This is even shown to be how it works in the manga's interpretations of Hit's time skip. As it was pointed out by Goku, the reason Hit hides his hands in his pockets is because it would give away whenever he's about to activate his time skip, which better helped Goku react to whenever Hit decided to use it against him. So Hit is not actually stopping time, he's entering a dimension where in comparison to the mortal world, time isn't moving. Similar to how with the room with Spirit and Time, a year passes in there, while outside, only a day has passed. So even when Goku breaks into it, it has nothing to do with speed. Heck, we literally see him destroy it with a Kamehameha within the Goku assassination arc. All Goku says in the anime is that because of the level he's at now, it doesn't matter how far Hit pushed his time skip. And with the manga, it's verbatim stated that simply being stronger than Hit would cause you to not be affected by his quote-unquote time abilities. So it's consistent across both continuities that Hit's time skip works this way. It's not time stop, it's simply dimension hopping. Which properly leads into another infamous scene of Jiren moving while under the effects of Hit's time prison, or in the manga, it's referred to as the time lag, which may be a separate ability but I'll still address it regardless. What people claim is Jiren moving while under its effects means that he's moving within zero time. Along with the fact that Vados claims Jiren must be above time itself due to this, people then come to the conclusion that Jiren now has inaccessible speed. However, there are many things wrong with this interpretation and is the pinnacle of Dragon Ball fans can't read. But first, let's go back to Hit. As we just went over, Hit's abilities are based on the fact that he has access to a dimension where time doesn't flow in comparison to the mortal world, similar to how the Room of the Spirit in Time works. However, as it was shown back in the Goku assassination arc, that Hit's abilities extend to also bringing in someone else into this same dimension with him, which was actually foreshadowed back in the Universe 6 arc, how Hit can actually quote-unquote stop anyone else's time, which is honestly such a weird way to describe his ability, since Goldo's ability can also be described in this exact same way, despite the fact that the way in which he manipulates time, or how it relates to him, is very different in how time applies to Hit's abilities, which ends up helping me in being able to better explain the idea of how a vague statement like this could accurately describe two characters' abilities while also being vague enough so that it doesn't inherently imply that both are the exact same. So that's just explaining away that statement. But let's talk about when the ability is actually used. In the anime, we see Jiren enveloped in purple, and we are even shown that he's trapped within Hit's dimension. So not only is Hit capable of bringing people into his dimension, but trap people within it. In the manga, it's described as time being warped around him, so that causes Jiren to slow down. However, in both continuities, Jiren quite literally breaks out of both techniques. With the anime, multiple bystanders describe it as Jiren's strength being beyond time, not his speed. Besides people not realizing that part in all of these statements that they're blatantly disregarding or ignoring, the main problem is people taking his strength is beyond time itself out of context, which is why there is so much confusion surrounding this feat. Context is what helps us determine the meaning of especially vague statements, as we just went over when we were talking about Goldo and Hit. When we insert context, things become a lot more clear. So when these characters are talking about Jiren's strength being beyond time, then we have to ask ourselves, what did they just see that would cause them to say this? Hit versus Jiren, where Hit was using a time-related ability on Jiren, in which Jiren proceeds to overpower Hit and literally break out of it. So they're referring to Jiren being beyond Hit's time abilities, not Jiren being literally beyond time in every single facet, because Jiren was trapped within a dimension that makes it seem like he isn't moving to the outside world, but ends up breaking out of it, with all the bystanders commenting on the situation as Jiren using his strength to accomplish this feat. To those who have watched Dragon Ball Super, this isn't a foreign concept, as we have seen Vegeta literally power up so much to the point where he ends up destroying the Room of Spirit and Time. So no, Jiren's feat isn't that impressive in itself. While on the topic of the Tournament of Power, let's talk about where it takes place in, the World of Void, which some people say that due to the statement from Beerus that it's a world without time or space, that any characters simply moving in it grants them inaccessible speed. At least with the arguments regarding Hit's time skip, it makes sense how people misinterpreted the way that they did, but with the World of Void, there are just blatant story elements present that cause this conclusion to literally contradict the plot of the Tournament of Power. For instance, there is a literal timer in the World of Void that measures how long until the specified 48-minute tournament ends. Even if they were truly moving at inaccessible speeds, then the tournament would have ended in literally no time at all. And the whole point of there being a timer to specify when the tournament ends would be an irrelevant plot point, as well as the fact that it's stated at the end of nearly every episode how many minutes passed or how long until the tournament ends. Also, there is just a scene shown in the anime where the Universe 2 fighters are attempting to get love from the universe's inhabitants, and we see the Tournament of Power being streamed to them in real 1-to-1 time. Unless we're going to bite the bullet and say that everyone watching the Tournament of Power from Universe 2 is inaccessible speed, this would utterly debunk this argument. Also, if everyone now just has inaccessible speed, kind of makes the previous feat from Jiren pretty lackluster if it was supposed to be a demonstration of inaccessible speed. So time not existing within the World of Void makes little to no sense when, you consider the plot of the series and what's more consistent to be the case. Now that we've properly addressed all the arguments regarding Hit in the Tournament of Power, it's time we address some of the weird instances during the Future Trunks arc, which are honestly the far more confusing instances that people interpreted as relating to a demonstration of speed. More specifically, what happens when Zamasu tries to become one with space and time, and what occurs after Zeno kills him. So when Zamasu gets sliced in half and disappears, he seemingly becomes back as this astral corporeal being that is attempting to become one with space and time, quite literally fusing with the universe to become the ultimate justice and overseer of everything. Now, the argument people are making is that because we see him begin to quote-unquote travel to the main timeline as well, that it's a demonstration of immeasurable speed. But is it really? Remember, the only reason Goku Black was able to originally travel back to the main timeline where Future Trunks had ran off to was because the time ring sensed a disturbance in time, which then the ring created a rift in space-time that allowed him to be able to travel there. And where does Zamasu appear when he begins to fuse with the main timeline? In the exact same spot where the rift had been opened. And keep in mind, Zamasu would still have the time ring at this point, so it's even more likely that he would have had to use its abilities to allow himself to be able to seep into the main timeline. But even if we discounted all of that, then we have to ask ourselves, what is Zamasu doing here? Well, as stated previously, his new state of being is now becoming the physical universe, and he's essentially going around like a virus, spreading and expanding his influence everywhere so he could become justice and order. He's not performing a movement where he's going so fast that he's now capable of time travel. That's not what's happening. Zamasu is becoming omnipresent, where the universe is now his new state of being. The context just doesn't align with this interpretation that the reason he was able to travel there due to his raw movement speed. It's even more inconsistent for that to be the case when Goku and Vegeta, who are both so drained from fighting as Vegito and giving all their reserves to Trunks to finish off Zamasu, that they can't even transform, and they were shown reacting to and blocking attacks from this version of Zamasu. Just to recap, Fuse Zamasu was able to fight these guys at their most powerful and have shown prior feats of being massively faster than light. And Goku and Vegeta haven't recovered, let alone healed after the battle, and they're now shown to be able to react to the attacks of Astro Zamasu, who, if he was Immeasurable Speed, should have become more than infinitely faster than them at this point. So are we about to say that Goku and Vegeta have also shattered the same barrier because they reacted to Zamasu's attacks? And before someone brings up the whole attack speed thing I mentioned earlier as some kind of gotcha, unless we're about to say that these attacks are that much slower than Zamasu's own reaction time, in which he should be able to react to his own movement speed, by the way, then attempting to salvage this argument by saying that his attacks are more than infinitely slower than his own reaction time is completely nonsensical. Now has come to the part where I've been dreading, the weirdest and most controversial instance surrounding this subject of Goku having inaccessible speed. And it's this instance in the manga where Goku goes out to grab Zeno after he erased Zamasu. The argument being that Zeno erases Zamasu from existence, and Zamasu was fusing with space-time. Therefore, this would now be a timeless void, and moving within it would grant you inaccessible speed. Now, out of all the arguments I've seen, this one I can understand where people were confused with how to take this, because it's such a weird scenario that most people just want to forget even happened. So they wouldn't even have to bother with explaining to someone the issues with Goku possibly having inaccessible speed in order to do what he did. Even Seth didn't know how to address it in his supposedly perfect Goku video. So let's finally address it. The main issue with this argument is that it's conflating the idea of existence erasure and conceptual erasure. While Zamasu was erased from existence along with the contents of the timeline such as the other universes, however, that doesn't mean the rest of everything else like the concepts of space or time no longer exist there. Essentially what happened was the equivalent of you erasing the contents of a save file. There is still space in which a new file can be inserted. The slot itself did not get erased from existence, the save file itself did. Just like how when Zeno erases people from existence, he doesn't erase the space in which the characters previously inhabited. Remember, Zamasu was fusing with the universes, the timeline, and was spreading around like a virus. So when he got erased, the timeline and the other universes within Future Trunks' timeline were erased as well. but because he wasn't successful with properly infecting the main timeline, we only see him disappear from the timeline instead of the timeline along with him. So even though it was just an empty void, it doesn't mean it's devoid of the concepts of space and time. Heck, in the anime, it's not this white or black void, it's actually a background that is similar to the background that contains the world of Void. So just more evidence that it is just an empty void that Goku flew in. So yeah, nothing impressive here. And that should be everything. Hopefully this will be enough to satisfy the community and will restrain people from continuing to use these terrible arguments that don't take context or the actual plot of the story into account. And maybe, just maybe, these people will finally learn the value in actually reading the series they'd like to talk about. With that being said, thank you all for watching, and class is dismissed.